What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. We are back to working on the 80 series Land Cruiser. Unfortunately, it's not all good news, so I'll give you a look at what's happened and what our roadway ahead looks like.
So back in May of this year, I had a driver coming around a turn and he almost hit me head on. I veered all the way into the ditch to avoid him and he still ended up hitting me. You can see the brunt of the force was right here on the ARB bumper. It went all the way back and touched this and sprung back. So just to kind of give you an idea of how much force was exerted on it. It also bent our front axle housing. So I'm gonna have to replace that. It bent our radius arm and possibly damaged some other components. I'll give you guys a more in-depth look at that when we're tearing it apart. Obviously broke my mirror and just ruined the fender and all down the side of the truck, and really just overall just really tore it up. So the goal of this video here is to essentially resurrect it from its current condition. I've finally got everything resolved with insurance, which took much longer than it should have. They did total it, but in Virginia you can apply for rebuilt title and still drive it on the road. So basically I kept the truck, they paid me for the damages, and now we're using that money to fix her up.
So as some of you may know, my original plan was to start doing an LS swap on the Land Cruiser once I was done with the Tacoma. Now that I'm finished with the Tacoma, obviously I have to fix some damages from the accident before we can do that. But good thing about this is it has forced my hand as far as doing some other upgrades to the truck that I was already going to do anyways. We're going to be converting it to part-time four-wheel drive, so we'll have manual locking hubs up front, and it's not just going to be all-wheel drive truck under normal operations. This will allow me to run two-wheel drive low and just kind of give me some more options playing around with the truck, and also keep that front axle from rotating constantly, which will save some wear and tear on our front berths. We're also going to be adding trusses and gussets and all this good stuff to our new front axle housing. So our new front axle housing is going to be much stronger than the current one that was in it. We're going to have part-time four-wheel drive, and we're also going to have transfer case reduction gear. So this is going to give us a lower gear ratio while in Ford low. So all in all, I was very bummed that the truck got hit, but I'm very glad it has forced me to go ahead and do these upgrades. And once all these are done and the truck is back up and running, then we will dive into the LS swap, because that's still going to happen. Of course, for this part, we could have pulled the entire housing without disassembling anything, but because we're reusing a lot of these parts, it's easier to make the housing as light as possible and pull everything that we could before we tried to drop the axle itself.
Alrighty, so that's the axle out from under the 80. We'll put a funny little first-person POV video of me pulling it out. You saw in the time lapse it ended up flipping over, but did not work out quite as planned. I will say the Badlands jack rolls super easy. And as you'll see in that first person video, once it just started to roll, at that point I was controlling the other jack and I was just trying to keep up with it, and it just fell off and did a little flip. Everything looks good. You can really see how bent this sucker is now that it's not in the truck. That's straight, so this should be right here. I mean, it is just totally banana. I hope this is easy to see on camera here. That is just no bueno. And the axle I cannot pull out of the diff because of that. So that's the reason I had the diff in, even dropping the housing. When I go to put a new one in, not gonna have the diff in it because it's gonna make it so much easier and much lighter. So what I'm gonna have to do is take an angle grinder and cut the housing in half right here. And that is so I can actually get the axle shaft out of the differential, so I can still remove the differential. We'll see what our axle shaft looks like in there. I'm obviously not going to try to cut into it as I'm doing this. Right now it is definitely under tension and bent. But if it looks relatively straight, maybe it'll pull it off, because that's only going to be turning in real low speed stuff, not even going down the highway, so it may not even matter. We'll just have to see, because I think my Burfield joint and everything looks good still. So we'll get that cut in half and see what we got. So that ended up working pretty awesome. I just cut it with an angle grinder, pulled the shaft right out of the diff, and then actually the axle just slid right out of this. I thought maybe I'd have a little bit of trouble there, but she was all good. Axle surprisingly looks nice and straight as far as I can tell. Even if it is slightly bent, I mean, I'm gonna be going 5-10 miles an hour when four-wheel drive's engaged, so I don't think it's really gonna matter. So yeah, looking pretty good. That's a good positive. I was really thinking I was gonna have to buy some new axle shafts. Like I mentioned, those are chromoly, so they are pretty expensive. So very, very glad that those seem to be okay. Next move is get the diff out, this other axle housing all out of the way. We're picking up our other housing in 2 days. Start prepping that one and getting it ready to go back in. Meantime, we got a bunch of other stuff we can do to the truck.
With our donor axle in the garage, we're stripping this thing down to the bare bones. We want as much access to this housing as possible as we're adding gussets and reinforcements to it. There's a lot of good parts left on this thing that I'm end up keeping in the garage off to the side that may be good for future use. That includes this front third member, which was super stuck. Basically, the studs were rusted inside the housing of the third member, so it took some heat with a torch and some chisels to finally get this thing out of the housing.
Now we've got our donor axle all stripped down and ready to add some reinforcements to it. You can see we got an axle truss kit. We got a kit for the radius arm mounts to reinforce those, knuckle reinforcements, steering arm, and then we also have a front diff guard that we're going to end up welding on there. All this stuff's from Rampt Customs out of Australia. He was super easy to work with. I just had to send him an email, let him know I wanted to ship to US. He sent me an invoice, paid it, and then had it out to me very quickly. There was like almost little to no wait time, which was awesome. So now we're going to get to installing this stuff. First thing I have to do is do a little bit of a transplant of this perch here. You can see there's a rust hole through it. The ones on the axle that I already took out are still in good shape. So I'm thinking I could just take an angle grinder and kind of get our welds off on both sides, remove this, and put our ones from our old unit in, weld it in, and have some nice rust-free perches. That when we go to coat this, we don't have any underlying rust that's going to continue to form. After that's done, we'll start working on welding some other stuff in. There is a little bit of a precautionary process when welding in a truss like this, which I will go over when we get there.
It was so nice to have the axle out from underneath of the truck to do all this type of work. Just having easy access to everything, being able to replace these spring perches, get everything all nice and clean. As you can imagine, trying to do some of this stuff with it still in the truck would be very difficult. So even if you have a good axle housing, it may be a good idea to just completely pull it, put it on some jack stands, and really get to work with it. Overall, the fit up of these radius arm gussets from Rampt Customs was awesome. I had to do just a little bit of beveling on the inside edge to clear the factory welds that go around that axle housing, but that was to be expected. Everything else lined up perfectly, and as you can see, I used our bolts to make sure our plates were in just the right position before I welded them on. The front diff guard could be a little tricky just to kind of juggle all these pieces at once, but overall it was much easier than I expected, especially once you get a few tacks in it. And I also think this is a very vital piece of protection that you can add to your front of your axle, especially if you're doing some rock crawling. Finally, adding the axle trusses to the housing. This was actually filmed over the course of a few days, and here in the next slide I will go into detail on why it took me a few days to do this portion.
Alrighty guys, so that is everything welded on the axle as needed. Got our new spring perches on here that are not rusty. We got our knuckleball gussets. This is strengthening this whole section of the axle, so no worries about bending there. We have our front diff guard, so this is protecting our ring gear on our differential. I did throw a couple beads right here on the front of our differential drain just to kind of help strengthen up this bit, because you can imagine when it hits rocks it's easy to bend this in and then make it hard to get a socket on this. So got our radius arm plates on there, and then of course our trusses, which was probably the largest amount of welding on the whole project. So something I want to point out, when you're welding trusses like these onto the axle, you want to not put a ton of heat into this axle all at once. So you can imagine if you were to tack these trusses in and then just run two huge beads on each side of this, you run risk of actually warping your axle housing. What I did was actually get this on here, tacked it on, welded one end, and then did a bead in the center on both sides. And after that, I actually let it sit overnight. Came back, added a few more welds, just kind of jumping around back and forth, let it sit overnight again, and then came back for the third and final day and did the finish welding just to make sure that I wasn't gonna have any warpage. And then of course I was working on this one at the same time that I was doing that. So as far as I can tell, everything is looking great. No warpage there, but it's one of those things, it's definitely capable of happening. It doesn't really seem plausible with such a beefy housing like this, but others have reported it happening to them if they do not take those precautionary measures. So I highly recommend you do that when you do yours. Happy I'm taking the time to go through and beef this thing up. It's going to be an awesome housing underneath of this truck, and it'll last me for many years to come with all this reinforcement. Another bit of welding that we've done from Rampt Customs is our reinforcements for our steering arms. So a lot of people have problems with these steering arms, these nuts loosening up, and that's mainly because all the forces that are being put from each opposing end or just our single end on the other one ends up loosening the nuts over time. And then when the nuts are loose, it makes it really easy, or easier, to shear these studs right out of the knuckle, especially on her hard wheeling with big tires. So what I've done to make sure that never happens again is weld in these plates. So this ties these arms to the knuckle housing, and then I've also got some of the DVS nut huggers, they call them, which will keep these nuts from being able to work loose. Little precautionary, or I guess a measure you should take when welding these, is actually you have to preheat the housing. So I actually dangled these over my propane fire pit over there with the engine crane and heated it up until they showed about 300 to 400 degrees. Online it said about 250 degrees Fahrenheit was sufficient, so I just went a little bit higher and then immediately brought it over here on the bench, tacked all of our plates on here, and then completely finished welding them up. Immediately after being done with that, I ran it back over to the engine crane, hoisted it above the fire, and turned the fire down. And then I did that, and I slowly raised these up and up away from the fire to slowly cool them down, because apparently cast steel, this is just what I'm reading online, over cool them down too quickly, it'll actually end up cracking the welds, and then it just won't be a very structurally safe weld. So a nice slow cool down was the way to go, cooling down over the course of about an hour or so. And then finally, when it got down to about 100 degrees, using a temperature gun, I pulled them off the fire and set them over here on the bench for the final cool down. So just a little precautionary if you guys are going to be welding these yourselves. I'm not a professional welder by any means. I am 100% Google learned on that aspect and just from the advice of some other people. And that's what I came across, that's what I did, and everything seemed to work rather well. We're just about ready to put the housing back onto the truck. We got our studs transferred over here. We got our gasket surface all cleaned up. We're in the middle of rebuilding the steering box, and also not part of this video, but I just wanted to show you. In the steering box video, I'm going to go over this frame plate and gusseting for the steering box location. Something else we did that I just kind of kept out of the video was replace this radius arm mount. This was bent in the accident, and thankfully L-Stock Automotive had one I could cut off a truck he was going to scrap. So I have a new one, or a new to me one, welded on and plated on both sides. So now we have a nice solid place to mount our radius arms. I think first thing we're going to do, we left our one radius arm over there. We're going to get the other one bolted up, and then we're going to get our bare housing bolted up to the truck. And I got to cycle the suspension and check some numbers for some future shock purchases.
Much lighter and easier to get the housing moved across the garage without the knuckles and the differential in it. Getting it hooked up to the radius arms and then raising it up with the jack was the easiest way that I found to get it in there by myself. The differential isn't necessarily light, but it's not too hard to get it up in there, even laying on the ground like this. Having the studs sticking out of the housing for us to slide the differential onto make it super easy, because once you get it on the studs, it pretty much holds itself. You can get a nut started and not have to worry about it falling back out. If you've never reassembled bare field joints before, it's really not too bad of a job. It's just super messy because it involves a lot of grease, and there are some steps that need to happen in a certain order. If you've never done this before and you want to know how it's done, I do have a video on my channel that you can go check out that I will link in the description, and it'll help you go through it in a detailed step-by-step instructional video, and it'll make it super easy.
Alrighty guys, we are about wrapped up. As you saw, we got the axles in and our knuckles rebuilt. One thing that's not in this video is we also rebuilt our steering box and tapped it for future hydro assist. So I'm gonna have a completely separate video on that will be out after this video. So if you're interested in that, make sure you subscribe so you can see when I post that one. Also gonna be a separate video where I show you how I do the part-time four-wheel drive conversion, which includes the portion in the transfer case and also doing low range reduction gears at the same time. So that'll be another future video that will be out after the steering box video. But overall, I'm really happy to have the truck back together. My plan right now is I've already filled the front diff with some fluid. I'm gonna drive it around just a little bit without doing the part-time full drive just yet, so I can get my front axle all churned. And because we've had this housing out, we've been welding on it and all that good stuff, I know there's probably debris in there that I haven't gotten out. So I think it's better if we drive it a little bit, let all that debris get caught up in this fluid, and then when I pull it in here to do the part-time full drive and the low range reduction gears, which will be here this week, I can drain the fluid that has already sloshed around in there and then put some nice clean fluid in there. Obviously some other stuff we got to do is a little bit of body work, put our corner light on, I did source a mirror. I'm not really going to do a video about that, but I will give you guys a little update on the body here in one of these upcoming videos.
So as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. Everything is going to be linked in the description as always. If there's anything you feel like I left out, feel free to leave a comment and ask questions. I'll answer it to the best of my ability. And of course, like I mentioned, we got some other videos coming up in the pipeline. We got our steering box rebuild and tap for hydro assist, as well as the reduction gears and the transfer case and the part-time four-wheel drive. I think both of those deserve their own dedicated, detailed video. So if you're looking to do this yourself, those videos are really going to help you out. So don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.